In this video, we describe the various components that make up a complete AAI instance. We have three major items. First, the AAI server and its config tool. Second, a connecting technology between AAI and the supported schedulers. And third, the reporting server. AAI can integrate with multiple schedulers, and we will be using atomic automation, since it requires one of the more standard technologies, the connector framework, which is a component in and of itself. Then the video looks at the file systems. We'll explore the various directories and key files for each component on both Unix and Windows platforms. Administrators need logs to troubleshoot. We'll go over the logs of each component and where they can be found. We'll also cover the Windows services and Unix processes. We felt it would be good to isolate the reporting server and keep it for the end, so as to describe all three aspects, file system, logs, and processes, since it's fairly simple and can be quickly summed up. Let's start with a presentation of the architecture of an instance. The AI solution is layered over the existing IT automation infrastructure. That means you'll be starting with a scheduling tool, say AutoSys, CA7, or Atomic Automation. The core component of the instance is the AAI server. Its two main infrastructure elements are the JBoss web server and the database. To install AAI, we deploy the data structures to a database, either SQL Server on default port 1433 or Oracle on 1521, and the AAI web application artifacts to JBoss on the usual default port 8080. This creates three major interfaces, the two web interfaces and the legacy tool, the Java-based thick clients, which we no longer cover as it's being phased out and is becoming obsolete. Note that the config tool is a separate utility with no process and a simple file system. It's always installed on the same host as the AAI server. A connection needs to exist between AAI and the supported scheduling solutions for data acquisition. The specifics of these connections vary with the scheduler. Some scheduling solutions are natively reachable over JDBC. For the purposes of this course, we need one scheduling solution, and we'll use Atomic Automation since it's a Broadcom product and uses the connector framework, an independent technical component we present in this course. The connector framework is a separate software component that should be installed on a dedicated system. It has its own file system, log, and server processes. The connector communicates with the AAI server over HTTP, and that connection is defined in a file called application.yaml. We use the AAI web UI to configure a dedicated connection to each scheduling solution. The connector extracts operational data, essentially execution records, and object definitions like jobs and schedules to build the AAI database. Dynamic executions data is sourced on very short cycles, say every 20 seconds, while stable object data is extracted on longer cycles, say once a day. Finally, we deploy the reporting server. One of the core functions of AI is to analyze data and present it in structured reports. These capabilities have been externalized to a separate software component called the reporting server, which is entirely web-based and accessible using the AI web UI. This server relies on several third-party products, Apache Tomcat for the web server, and a commercial distribution of Jaspersoft for the reporting engine. Note that Jaspersoft requires an embedded PostgreSQL database. The web server is accessible over default port 8080, and you'll need to change this, say to 8081, if you decide to deploy the reporting server on the same host as AAI. As always, Broadcom does not recommend this approach. Each component should be installed on a dedicated host. Once up and running, the reporting server extracts data from AAI and imports it into Postgres to build reports. In large-scale production environments, we recommend mirroring the AAI database and dedicating that duplicate to the reporting server. In this and future versions of AI, the web interfaces are the de facto working environments. Legacy user communities who worked with prior versions of AI did so in the Java-based thick clients, which is being phased out. It's still there for sending compatibility purposes. However, we want our legacy users to understand that most, if not all, client features and capabilities have been ported to the web UIs. As a result, all learning contents moving forward will be provided in the web interfaces, unless we run into specific feature function sets which have not yet been ported. This should be rare. Let's start with AAI and its file system. This includes the config tool. When you install with the default settings, the Automation Analytics Intelligence directory is created under the C drive or in /opt. We start with the JBoss directory. This is the web server file system, which contains all the executables, libraries, and configuration files to operate, as well as the AAI web apps WAR and EAR files that get deployed at installation. We'll come back to this. The config directory contains the configuration tools file system, with essentially some libraries and the log. The config tool is a fairly simple utility, and so the directory isn't particularly extensive. This is covered in the content dedicated to the config tool. The next directory contains the AAI command line interface's file system. This is where CLI commands and CLI config files are stored. This is covered in the content dedicated to the command line interface. The connectors directory contains the necessary executables and configuration files to deploy connectors. This is covered in the content dedicated to connectors and TLS implementations. On Windows, the daemon folder contains the service that gets added to the list of Windows services when AAI is installed. Import-export contains specific tools to migrate data in and out of AAI instances. This is covered in the content dedicated to import-export. Finally, the scripts directory contains the scripts necessary to deploy, update, or delete AAI's data structures in the hosting database. In other words, Oracle or SQL Server. This is covered in the content dedicated to installing AAI. There are other directories, one for Java, one for Autosys APIs, the documentation, and some script examples specific to Autosys. These aren't as important, and you'll be able to research them in your own time. Let's consider some of the files in the root AAI directory. You'll find the executable you run to initiate AAI. This starts the JBoss server and connects to the data source. You'll also find the config tools executable, which starts it. Finally, there's the uninstall executable. Under JBoss standalone deployments, you find the set of AAI, WAR, and EAR files. These are the web archive files that are loaded into the web server to run AAI. AAI UI is the web interface. There's also the custom condition generator, which we cover elsewhere, subscription and telemetry for licensing, and JAWS and Terma, which are additional AAI modules that are part of the overall solution. Under JBoss standalone log, you find the AAI logs. JAWS.log traces all AAI events, and server.log logs the events of the startup procedure. Finally, under config/log, you find the config tool log, which you can use if you fail to connect to AAI initially, or if you run into DB connection issues. This is covered in the contents on installation. Under JBoss standalone configuration, you find one important file, standalone.xml, which we use to deploy and configure the TLS implementation where AAI and other components should be accessed over HTTPS. Finally, connectors have their own file systems. The directory contents vary based on the connector. In our case, the Atomic Automation connector is installed in either program files or /opt, has a number of Java files, the connection to the REST API, an output.log file, and more. Let's consider the Windows services and Unix processes. In Windows, things are simple. There are two services which are created and installed for AAI and the connector. They can be set to automatic, which auto-starts both components at boots. The config tool does not have a service. In Unix, we have three process groups, JBoss, Atomic-Connector, and Config, for AAI, the connector framework, and the config tool respectively. This last segment focuses on the reporting server. By default, it's installed under the C drive or in /opt. The directory is called bi-server/server. The reporting server depends on a number of third-party products, JasperSoft, which is an off-the-shelf reporting solution, Apache Tomcat for the web server, PostgreSQL for Jasper's internal database, and Java. These third-party products have their own dedicated directories. Note that the reporting server uses two data sources. It extracts data from the AAI database and stores it in the Postgres embedded database. In larger enterprise implementations, users replicate the AAI database, and the reporting server uses the mirror so as to not impact overall AAI performance. The server has a handful of core files. Properties.ini stores the technical data, like values for Postgres and Tomcat, the home directories, and ports. The term.ibi files contains values for JAWS and the mail servers, such as the hostname, port, usernames, and passwords. You also find the uninstaller. The server's logs can be found in several places. You should look at the Tomcat logs. The server will trace server events, and the Jasper reports logs traces Jasper events specifically. Also, you can check the installation.log file at the roots to troubleshoot installation issues. The server is essentially a self-contained application, meaning a database, a reporting solution, a web server, and some Java files. As such, it has two Windows services referring back to JasperSoft specifically for the database and the web server. Unix has a similar process structure, the Tomcat and Postgres processes, both for JasperSoft.